And we are back for another episode of The Wrap. 50-something.
58.
8. Really? Doesn't even feel like it feels like we just did our 50th episode. 58.
58, I believe.
For real. And we have a doozy for you today. On the docket, we have...
Lions, Tigers,
no, just Lions. And a Daniel. We get to talk today about our good buddy Daniel, which we just had a Bible study last night, and we were talking about something completely different, talking about the minor prophets, and we somehow got to talking about Daniel. One of our people goes, "You didn't spend long enough on Daniel." And I was like, yeah, I could spend forever on Daniel.
That's a deep book.
It is. Yeah. I mean, the last half of the book's
deep.
all prophecy, and you're just like, what's going on here? The first 6 chapters there are all about Daniel and his friends and about their faithfulness in the midst of a very hostile culture and environment. And I think it's really, to me, kind of the big takeaway. And we always ask when we look at the Bible, does this have anything to do with my life? I mean, do 3 guys caught in a furnace or 1 guy caught in a lion's pit have anything to do with me? Am I going to be thrown in a furnace? Probably not. Am I going to be thrown in a lion?
Not anyway.
We hope that you do not get thrown there. Am I going to get thrown in a lion's pit? It's not likely that's going to happen. But do you know what's true? And the thing that I said, let me be very blunt with you, church. The world hates you.
If I remember right, Jesus said the same thing.
Yeah, we spent some time talking about Jesus' words that, if you were like the world would love you, but you're not like the world. You're called to becoming out of the world and to be distinct from the world, and so the world hates you because of that. And then he says, John 16:33, "But take heart because I have overcome the world." And
so you're saying if you're sticking out like a sore thumb because of your belief in Jesus and you're following after Jesus, then that's a good thing.
In fact, I said, not those exact words, but I said that on Sunday morning, that if you feel like you're going in the opposite direction, you're a salmon swimming upstream, good.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, you're right where you need to be. If you feel like you're experiencing opposition because of your faith and living your faith for Jesus, good. You're right in the right place. In fact, I did use some S words on Sunday to talk about.
Some S words?
Yeah, I know. It sounds really bad, doesn't it? Very, very biblically appropriate.
Okay.
To describe kind of Daniel's, especially in chapter 6, but I think it is true really of Daniel's life as a whole, of things that happen when we find ourselves up against it. And again, I asked on Sunday, I started with that. I was like, let me ask a really stupid question. How many of you feel like either in the recent past or maybe right now where you're sitting that you've been up against it?
It's about everybody.
Everybody can. Everybody, there was one of the only times in time at New Heights here that full audience participation. It's like, bam. And that's a good moment, right? When you got all hands, everybody's going to be able to
Everybody's tracking with you on
Everybody's tracking right now. So you watching at home as well, too, we know this to be true, that probably most everybody who's going to watch this and come across this will at one point in their life, either in the distant past, recent past, or in the present, and I've always heard it this way, if you've not just come out of a storm or you're going through a storm,
get ready.
Because the storm is coming. Yeah. All right. Yeah. And so Daniel's life is very much that. It is kind of a storm that he goes through. Right. And I'm going to bring up my notes here just so I make sure that I get these correct. And we'll talk about this a little bit. And this may be kind of where we form everything around for our time here. So, my line was that obedience to God and living for God means that we're oftentimes going in the opposite direction.
Right.
And so then kind of my S's that I talked about, let me find him really quick, is you will be opposed, you will be hated, but stand out was the first one we talked about.
Yeah. And from the very beginning, we see Daniel standing out. I mean,
and he doesn't say a single word, but go ahead and tell me what you're thinking of. Just the way he
lives his life, when he's brought there as a teenager, he's like, no, I don't want the special foods. Here's what I'm going to eat.
I would say even before that, but that certainly is a great example. But when Nebuchadnezzar brings these boys into his court to essentially brainwash them is what he's doing, he says, guys, I only want you to bring the best of the best, the most handsome.
So he was already standing out by then.
I mean, we know Daniel is a good-looking dude. What we often don't remember, and it says right there in Daniel chapter 1, now I know we're in Daniel 6, but everything that comes before 6 informs what happens in chapter 6. So kind of have to talk
All
about
part of the story.
we have to talk about it a little bit. It says very specifically at the very beginning of chapter 1, Daniel was a member of the royal family in Jerusalem. And so in so many ways, he sticks out like a sore thumb, whether it be because he's of royal stock, whether he's handsome, he's fit, he's just naturally inclined for it. But I said on Sunday, none of that matters.
Right.
That is not what makes Daniel stick out. In fact, if you read all of those first 6 chapters over and over again, to some level, the wording comes up that says that Daniel was a man who had exceptional ability, an exceptional spirit. He had the spirit of the gods in him. And I am convinced that that's no mistake, because they're trying to say, now, although Daniel does have some natural abilities, and he does have some good looks, and he does have an inclination.
Supernatural.
There's some supernatural, presence of God on this kid and on this guy's life.
Even the people who didn't believe in God could see that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. And I think, like, if you just stop right there, one of the things we talked about, one of the things that I get so frustrated about, and I've had so many conversations about this lately, is the way that Christians engage with the culture in really poor, hateful, unloving, sad ways. I'm like, you don't need to do that. And I've said it this way. I said it on Sunday, and if it ruffles people's feathers, it does. And I don't think it did. I just think it took people back going, what? You don't have to die on every hill. Not everything is this gigantic battle that I need to win this one. I need to win this one too. No. You're going to wear yourself out, and guess what? Who else are you going to wear out? Everybody else around you. Yeah. Like, dude, why do you have to be a fighter about everything? Daniel is not that. And what I said, instead of being a fighter, Daniel had in him and about him a quiet faithfulness. Yeah. So what's very interesting is Daniel comes to Babylon. That's where he's first taken into captivity. When he's probably a teenager. Some people say 10 years old is young. Some people say about 15 years old. So somewhere in that gap, he's a young guy. By the time we get to him in chapter 6, you know how old he is?
He's like 80 years old.
Over 80 years old. And do you know how much time?
It's a long 6 chapters.
It's like, well, those chapters went really quick from 10 to 80. Yeah. Like that. Do you know how by the time we get to chapter 6, how long he had served in multiple governments and under multiple kings? Do you know how long?
No.
Over 70 years of his life. In fact, I put that into perspective. That would be like somebody who was still in the White House today. They would have started serving in the Truman administration back in the 50s. Wow. 14 presidents.
That's a long time.
14 presidents.
Long time.
So Daniel's been serving long time, and I think it's because he was just quietly faithful. And through that quiet faithfulness, he influenced people tremendously.
Well, and even when he was trying to be forced to bow down, he didn't go off in a tirade and try to get a mass group of people to picket. He just said, no, as for me, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
It was just a quiet.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Or in his case, it wasn't really necessarily it wasn't a case of worship this. It was don't worship your God anymore. Stop praying. Right. And we're going to talk about that because that leads into the other S, is he stood out naturally, but he stood out, I believe, because of supernatural means. God was with him. Right. Much like, and people made this observation, his story is very similar to Joseph's.
Yeah.
Because it says right off the bat, when Joseph comes into Potiphar's house, Potiphar could see that the Lord was with him. Yeah. And so Potiphar says, I want to hitch my train to that car right there. Yeah. And it works out well for both of them. So Daniel's very much the same. And because he stands out, but I think also what was a really big part of his life and the reason that he was able to kind of stay in all of these governments for so long is that he stayed consistent. Yeah. And you see that because these guys concoct this plan. We've got to get Daniel. We want to bring, and we don't know exactly what it is that they have against Daniel. I'm not so sure because the whole thing is generated because King Darius wants to make Daniel the top administrator over all of the kingdom. I'm not sure that they even knew that. I don't think that that's something the king would have just willy-nilly told a bunch of people. I think that there are some other things that are revealed in the story that they have an issue with Daniel. I think just on a really base kind of race sense, he's a Jew. He's not one of them. It's one of your early forms of anti-Semitism. It's like, he's a Jew. He's from Judah. He's one of those boys like that you brought in here. He's not us, Darius. Yeah. I think that what really irked everybody about Daniel was he was so stinking consistent.
Yeah.
And everything he did.
He was trusted.
You remember what it was? They came and they said, we're going to try to find something against him. And what do they find against Daniel?
Nothing.
Zilch. I kind of laugh and jokingly said that
they had to create something to pin
they had
to
him. They had to turn his positive into a negative in order to get him. So it's comical. I was saying on Sunday jokingly that there are 2 miracles in chapter 6, the lion's den, which we'll talk about here in just a bit, but the fact that in over 70 years of political service and government service, there was a man who had no skeletons in his closet. That's
saying something right
That
there.
is a miracle in and of itself.
Yeah.
And so he stays consistent. It says these guys say, we can't find anything personally about him in his politics, and so we're going to have to pick on his personality and his principles. And they said, we know, and I think this is like the best testament and testimony you could ever give to somebody. We know that he is so faithful and consistent to his God that we'll get him on that. That he would rather die and go to his death than to worship Darius or any other deity or any other king. We'll get him right here. And so it says...
Which means he didn't hide.
Exactly.
His
very, very important.
Faith. That wasn't this is just between me. I don't need to tell anybody. Like, it was open.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so Daniel finds out that Darius signs this decree that anybody who prays to or pleads to or has anybody be a mediator for the next 30 days except for the king is going to go into the lion's den. And Daniel hears about this, and what does he do?
He goes and prays.
He freaks out about it, right? He just goes nuts. I'm like, how could they do this? This is unfair. I'm being persecuted. Here, no, what's he do?
He didn't storm the castle.
He didn't storm the castle.
No.
He went into his house
and
prayed. He prayed.
Yeah.
Got on his knees and prayed. But here's a very important phrase, and it says this in a couple different ways, right back to back, as was his usual routine. As he
You mean
had always...
he didn't just wait until the times were bad and then run to God like, help me, help me, help me?
Nope. In fact, I cannot remember, and if I look through my notes, I could probably find it, but I'm not going to sit and do that. Basically saying character is not forged in the moment. Character is forged. Faith is forged over a lifetime of consistent behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, Daniel had this faith from day one.
Yeah.
It did not just magically happen overnight at the snap of fingers. So he goes in and he prays, and like little teenage girls, these guys are sitting there like, we got him, we got him. And they feel like they've nabbed him. But what I want to focus on again is not the fact of this whole big scheme here, but that Daniel stayed consistent as he had always done, as was usual in his routine to do this. And so he stood out and he stayed consistent. I'm trying to find my next S here. It's coming to me. Courage, consistency, and blah, blah, blah. And it's coming. It's been like a week plus since I've done this. Here we go. Here's the part where we get to the juicy part of the story. Pun intended there. Daniel gets tossed in the lion's den, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And what's very interesting is the King Darius, is obviously invisibly shaken. He's trying to do everything he can to get him out of this moment.
Yeah.
It says he stays up all night because he's so worried about his friend.
Yeah.
And there's an element, and I do believe this is true. It depends on what translation you read, and it depends on if you really dig into the language there. But I believe that Darius is expressing faith that God will rescue Daniel. And the only reason I believe that is because when he comes out the next morning, by his virtue of his coming out to check and see if Daniel's alive, he has a faith that Daniel is still there.
Because
his God
normally
has
they
rescued
wouldn't
him.
be.
That doesn't happen usually when you throw people into a den full of lions. You're
Of
gone.
hungry lions. Yeah.
Yes. And we know that because we'll talk about that here in just a minute, why they were hungry. But we're talking about standing out, staying consistent, sticking with and trusting in God is kind of the third thing we talked about. It was very interesting. Again, as we asked the question, we're like, okay, this is odd here. A guy gets thrown in the lion's den and you're telling me he comes back out of that lion's den. Yeah, I believe that. Why? Was it because he like had like some lion treats in his robe and he was throwing into him?
Chair and a whip.
Yeah, he like,
Yeah.
or like they were sleepy and they were sleeping, or I've heard even they were old and they were toothless, so they couldn't eat Daniel. Like I've heard all kinds of dumb stuff. Like, really? Do you know why?
Because they were going to throw somebody they wanted to punish in a den full of
Sleeping
toothless lions. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Or
bat
do
you
you
to death
have an
with their
idea
paws.
for why Daniel was rescued and saved in that lion's den?
As a testament to God.
Testament to God for sure, but it says
Yeah.
very specifically there was not a scratch that was found on Daniel because he had trusted in his God.
Yeah.
So we are able to stand against the opposition. We are able to, as the world hates us, we're able to endure that as we stick with and trust in Jesus. Just like Daniel does in that lion's den. And we would be tempted to say, well, there was something going on there. There was supernatural stuff going on there.
There's a whole lot of something going on there.
A whole lot of something going on there. But like we try to explain it away, but the next, almost the next verse that we get is that Daniel was pulled out, and the people who had conspired against him were thrown in with their families. And before they even got to the floor, lions got a hold of them, crushed their bones, and disposed of them. We're like, okay, so this was like no fluky thing.
Yeah, these were real lions. They had teeth.
Again, it was because Daniel had trusted in his God.
Yeah.
And so we're like, at this point, like our mind is already like, wowzers. The most fascinating part of the entire story comes at the end. And we would stop there. We would stop as Daniel was rescued in the lion's den, and we would stop at the ickiness of whole families being killed because of the scheming of the head of their household. We're like, I can't go any further than this. Don't stop. Press on, because you remember what happens at the very end of the story? What Darius does? He makes a decree, and he essentially says at the end of it that God is the living God who endures forever, and how great he is, and he's extolling him, and he's exalting him above all things. And you're like, this is a pagan king, boys. Honestly, it's a pretty darn good sermon. Yeah. Like, just read the thing and you're like, there you go.
Yeah.
It's almost more faith than I've seen some Christians express in their life.
Well, and I think that's exactly why. I mean, Paul just talking about watch your witness, watch how you interact with the world, interact like Christ would interact, because they're watching.
Yeah.
That King Darius was watching Daniel and what was going to happen.
Well, not only that, but I think it's my supposition that Darius was massively influenced by Daniel even before that.
Oh, I'm sure.
I think that Darius had watched him for a long time and watched him live that quiet faith, and he was like, wow.
I think this was just the cherry on top.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
I think they even, in fact, probably had conversations about God.
Yeah.
I've heard some people even say to the level, and I can't say that they're not right, is that they expect when they get to heaven to see Darius. That's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, from a guy who is just quietly faithful.
Yeah.
And so we come to the end, he gives this decree that nobody should worship any other God than Daniel's God, because he is the God. Endures forever. He lives forever. And then you get to the very last verse. I've done 3 S's. We're going to kind of end and start to land the plane here, that we stand out in the face of opposition because we are with God, or God is in our life. We stay consistent. That helps us to stand against the opposition. We stick to trusting Jesus. That helps us to in the fiery moments, and those when the pressure is on. And the last thing is, verse 28 says, the last thing we get in all the biographical history of Daniel before we go into prophecy in the book of Daniel is Daniel prospered in the reigns of King Darius and Cyrus the Persian. Prospered. And immediately we read that and we think what?
He was rich.
He was rich. He was wealthy. He had everything. No, it just means, what I take that to be is he was successful, but more importantly than that, he was fruitful in his influence in the reigns of those 2 guys and many others.
Yeah.
And so the last S is this, that we shine with the glory of Christ. When we do all of these things before that we've talked about, we shine with the glory of Christ when we face those who hate us.
Yeah.
And it's just a phenomenal story to me of it's way more than just a guy in a lion's den.
Yeah.
There's so much around it that I think absolutely speaks truth into our lives in so many different ways. And so that's a really quick recap of Daniel chapter 6. Like I almost feel like you could preach at least.
You could probably do a sermon series on
two sermons at least, if not 3 on just Daniel 6.
And it's so pertinent to today. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's been pertinent in every generation. But if we look at the way our society's going, and we look at the fact that you talked about engaging culture negatively and how you just kind of come out with arms flailing.
Yeah, we're coming swinging, man.
When really we're not called to fight that. We're not called to fight the battle. We're called to
be the witness.
Be the witness. We're the ambassadors. We're not frontline. God can handle himself.
Yep.
We don't need to defend him.
Yeah. And one of the things that we used to frame everything on Sunday was this concept that we live in a world that is absolutely bonkers and out of control. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah.
I'm not being like a scare tactician or like a wackadoo. Like it's messed up, the world that we live in. But here's the thing that I said, and this is a thread that runs all throughout Daniel and carries all the way to Daniel chapter 6 and even all the way to Daniel chapter 12 at the very end of the book is God is in control. And I even said it this way, in spite of what you're seeing with your eyes today, and as you're looking out there into the world, in spite of those appearances, God is in control. I know of no better hopeful message than that people really need to hear right now, that Christian brother, sister, take a breath, be easy, live your life in quiet faithfulness, because no matter what it looks like in the world today, God is on that throne. He's in control of every aspect and part of life. And so I think that's
words
what we really...
live by.
Words to live by. In fact, I've got a pastor friend who says this, less world, more word. So if you find yourself being anxiety-ridden and panicked by what's going on in the world, just go to the Word.
Yeah.
Just go to the Word. Go read a book like Daniel and be like, I can breathe a little easier. It doesn't make it the world like a magical place of unicorns.
Yeah, it's not going to be
unicorns and bunnies and rainbows, but God's in control.
But there's a peace. There's a peace that comes with knowing that.
Yes, there is.
I'm reminded of, we've been going through the book of Revelation with middle school students. Sometimes we're getting ready to get into the...
Sometimes it feels like
crazy parts.
Sometimes it feels like Armageddon with school students.
But we're talking about how the whole thing is themed around victory.
God wins.
God wins.
Yeah, so it's not just Daniel. It's from front to back of the Bible. God is trying to show everywhere along the way. You're going to talk about Esther this coming week. What does that book have to say?
Yeah.
God is sovereign. He's in control.
And it says that without even mentioning God.
Without even saying a word about God. So again, we hope that's an encouragement to you, that you get an encouragement of what we talked about in the book of Daniel, and specifically chapter 6. Encourage you to go read that book for yourself.
It's an exciting book.
Very exciting book. It has all of the intrigue and action of a great Hollywood blockbuster. So we hope that's encouraged you, and then it helps you to continue to live your life in faithfulness to God every day of your life. So until we see you again, God bless.
See you guys.